Hey everybody, back again, and today we're just doing a little video about a blade I made for old-time bladesmith who is kind of given me a little gift I want to show you guys. So he wanted me to take this sheath that he had here and a little piece of antler he had and make a knife for him. This sheath is a piece of African blackwood that has been split down the center very carefully and inscribed on. What I've done is inlay some copper, wrap it, and make a blade for it. So it kind of resembles a donkey's jaw if you look at it. And the way these would work is when somebody didn't have time to take this out of the sheath and they just had to strike with it immediately, the idea behind the split piece of wood was that it would impact, cut through the twine, and obviously release itself from the sheath. And then you could just pick it back up and rewrap the twine if the wood didn't break. It is a fairly strong, flexible wood, so it can take an impact pretty well for how thin of a piece this is. But let's take the blade out and take a closer look at what we've got going on there. So we've got a burn-in tang, and I've actually bolstered it with two small pieces of copper wire to act as wedges. It is epoxied in after I burned it in, took it out and then epoxied it back in place. And then I wedged these in with the epoxy actually. Had to tap them in very carefully with a chisel to get them in there the right way, but this thing is solidly seated and it's not coming out. The antler would have to break for this thing to come out. I left the USA Maker's Mark from the original file. This is made out of a file. I figured it would look, really cool to give it a more aged look, make it look like it's been through the ringer. Obviously it's been polished and sharpened. It is a very, very fine edge on here. The point is actually quite an interesting design. It's got a drop point to it that leads down to a rounded point. It's actually a little better for piercing things to keep your edge intact because it'll use the spine to puncture rather than using the tip of the edge to puncture. But this is just about finished. I just have a little bit more cleanup work to do on it. Just a couple of spots I want to shine up a little bit better. The handle's been polished, all of the edges of the antler have been cleaned up, and then I've also put a little bit of resin over the course of the whole thing and then smoothed it up, just so that way any of the cracks in here are sealed. Even though you can still see them, they just aren't gonna, continue to crack or let any moisture into the handle. This sheath is actually quite beautiful though. There's a little flower down here and this really cool design. These are little hand carved things. They fluted this down the sides here, put these little teeth in it. So from this side it looks kind of like a donkey's jawbone, and from this side you can see it's got that star. This is the piece of brass that copper rather, that I decided to pop in there because there was something at one time that had been fitted in there with resin, but it's long since been lost, so I replaced that. And then I actually used the inside of some 550 paracord to wrap these, and then I hardened it with some resin to make sure that that cord doesn't come undone very easily, because I don't expect him to get ambushed while he has this on his person out on the street. I want it to be something that stays together for a long time and can be used repeatedly. But what's really cool is when it's in there, it fits really solidly. So what you do is you put the blade in, then you wrap it. You have to wrap it while the blade's in there, and that can be kind of tricky at first. My only advice is make sure you're squeezing this together at all times before you get that first wrap on there tight, because if you don't, you will drop your blade and you do not want to damage the blade you're working on. But yeah, from this side, it's got that kind of donkey jawbone motif. Very primitive looking, very old school, but basic enough to get the job done as a self-defense tool. It is quite a really interesting designed little piece that fits together with this really cool sheath. Most sheaths I've seen in my lifetime aren't made this way. You can split them, but usually what they'll do is they'll split it, hollow it out, and then glue it back together. This twine idea was quite an interesting concept at the time. I've seen other ones in some island cultures where they had steel wire. There are ones from this same kind of people group, from what I understand, that also had steel wire that ran through them. Just depended on if you could afford access to the steel wire in trade. But yeah, figured I'd show you guys that. Maybe dig on it. But this is going back to the guy who gave me the sheath, because it is his, and the project has been completed. God bless. Love you guys. Stay safe out there.